Okay, just a second. I think we are live. Okay, we're there. Bueno, buenas noches, todos y todas. Aquí estamos con William Archila. Esta presentación va a ser en inglés, pero sí quería dar la bienvenida en español y avisar también que William va a leer un poema en español y también acompañándonos esta noche está Efraín Caravantes, que también puede entrar a hacer unas preguntas en español. William también habla español, entonces si ustedes tienen preguntas, pueden hacer preguntas a través del chat y las vamos a contestar al final de la entrevista. William Archila is the winner of the 2023 Philip Levine Prize for Poetry for his collection S is For. Aquí está el libro. He is the author of The Art of Exile and the Gravedigger's Archaeology. He was awarded for the 2023 Jack Hazard Fellowship, and his work has appeared in Agni, APR, Copper Nickel, the Georgia Review, Kenyan Review, Prairie Schooner, Poetry, Plowshares, Poetry Northwest, Pleiades, Triquarterly, and the anthology Latino Poetry, the Library of America Anthology. He has work forthcoming in Colorado Review and the New Ohio Review, and he is associate editor at Dia Chucha Press, based in LA. I also want to mention that William has some poems published in Spanish. One of the latest ones was published in the Los Angeles Review and was translated into Spanish by the Salvadoran poet Mario Cetino. And you also have some good news regarding your other Spanish publications, right? Welcome, William. Tell us.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me. And thank you for all of those of you who are watching. Yes, there is a project right now in the works, which is a bilingual anthology of the first two books. So it's a selection of the first two books, The Art of Exile and the Gravedigger's Archaeology. So it will be in Spanish and English. But the first poem will be in Spanish and the second one in English. So it's directed to the Spanish speaker. Translated by Mario Cetino, as you said. And there are a lot of poems already that were published, a handful of them, I would say, in La Cebra, El Peso Luble, Revista Cametza, Alastor, and like you said, the Los Angeles Review. So there's a couple of poems out there that are already being published, and we're running out of time, so I just kind of stopped sending them out because it'll be out in the spring 2026.
Great. And in our chat, we're also going to post William's long bio as well as a link where you can purchase S is For, and also a link to his website and possibly also some links to those Spanish language poems. But tonight we're here to talk about S is For. And I want to kind of go back to remember the first time I came across your work. I think easily it's been a decade or more since I started becoming a fan of yours, I guess I could say. I remember reading The Art of Exile and really just being very, blown away, and really kind of understanding what it's like for a person who left El Salvador at an age where you're still old enough. You said you left when you were 12 to create to contain very vividly memories about people and places and things. And before we started this conversation, you briefly mentioned what that feeling is like as you start to look back to that time of your life, which we see kind of like glimpses of in these different collections. But I think focusing on this specific work, I wanted to say that I feel that there's a real difference in your style, William. I felt like the syntax was more kind of like short and clipped. There was like these interesting variations in diction and maybe a little bit more experimentation with your white space, kind of like the way that you frame the poem on the page. Um, Whereas I think like in your first two collections, I felt like a lot of the poems were guided by like a narrative impulse.
Mhm.
But always your work has this deep, lyrical thread going through it. Um, can you tell me about that? Like what happened there in that change in style? Like what's happened as you've started to go back in your memory and the way that you put those words on the page now?
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm glad you made that question because that was a very deliberate attempt or decision that I made with this book, and which is to start thinking more like an artist. I think with Art of Exile and the Gravedigger's Archaeology, I was more in the frame of, okay, how can I use the craft that I have learned, the craft about writing craft. How can I use those tools that I learned and still be truthful to my voice, right? So there was a lot of concern about what I had learned in terms of what you can do and what you cannot do in a poem, right? So there were all these voices and mainly academic voices, right? And that was one aspect of it. The other aspect is that I think I'm like, okay, so this is kind of like a relationship that I have with poetry, and I already had two books. And in order to continue that relationship with poetry, something has to change, right? In order to keep the relationship going. So I
Evolve.
thought, so I thought, okay, yeah, I think I need to start thinking of a different way how to tell my story, and um, I started thinking, okay, I done the narrative, and that was great and everything, but let me try to get away from that, and let me try to really play with language, well, at least attempt to play with language or start playing with language. And so that was something that I decided to do, and I started thinking about be, trusting trusting myself. When a certain word would pop up, where there was a sound or where there was an image or whatever, and to and so and not knowing why is that there, why is
Mhm.
this coming up right now, and not being able to figure it out. I and trusting myself that it's coming up for a reason. And so I would trust myself more, and I think that would break up the narrative a lot. Um, and I think that in the past I would have done that. I would have like, well, that doesn't make sense, and then everything has to be logical, and everything has to be linear, and 1, 2, 3, ABC, uh, beginning, middle, and end. Even with the line themselves, and I just started thinking like, okay, well, I tried to do that. Let me try something new. Let me see where that's gonna take me. And I didn't know where I was going, but I'll tell you that I enjoyed that journey. I enjoy and I learned to enjoy the journey of not knowing where I'm going, right? Because in the past, I had to know where I'm going because it was safe, right? It was safe to know where I'm going to go. And now is the opposite. Now it's like I have no idea, but this is great where I'm going to go. And just to surprise myself as the poem keeps unfolding, and to not be afraid to 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 say what I'm thinking. There was a lot of editing going on in the past, self-editing as I was writing, and now I'm like not doing that anymore, and I'm trusting myself a lot, and I think that there is a lot of things that are coming up that I think I was suppressing before. And because of that, I think I have allowed myself to find a new way of expressing myself, which is a lot more lyrical. Um, there's a lot more sonic texture in this book, I think, that I didn't have before, which I always loved, but I didn't know exactly how to go about it because I gotta tell the narrative, I gotta tell the story, and now it's like, I guess, another element to that is like, well, I did that, so now I have space to do this as well. So that was a deliberate decision that I took, I think, to start thinking more like an artist, make decisions that spoke to me more like an artist than someone who has learned a craft in a classroom.
I love it. That's such a
Mm.
great response. And it's a great segue into the next thing I want to talk about, because I think if in your first books, I felt very much a presence of music as being kind of like the thing that you were kind of like responding to. There is music in this collection as well, but I felt an overwhelming kind of presence of art and a lot of classical pieces. And so I wonder, if you could read one of those poems, and I have some images from the different poems that respond to some artwork. So I don't know if you want to read a particular one, and I can show on screen also the artwork that it's referring to.
I could read the Beyond Bruegel Shore. Would that be a good one?
Yes, that would be a perfect one. And I do you want me to display the photo just for a
Yeah,
minute?
that would be great. That's
Okay,
awesome.
okay.
It's better to look at that than me too.
There it is. Ahí estamos.
All right. So yeah, so this poem is inspired by the painting that you're looking at, by Peter the Elder Bruegel. There is a poem. Actually, there's a lot of poems written about this painting, but the main ones that I was looking at were the poems written by William Carlos Williams and W.H. Auden. Um, and so I love the conversation that they were having with this painting, right? So I wanted to take part of that conversation. Beyond Bruegel Shore, somewhere in Nicaragua or Guatemala, it doesn't matter. His wings ache from so much wax, so much discord in his father's voice. How once he fled the words of the state through air and sky, so simple and so exact, he fell from the clouds. Yet no one cared, not the hospitals, not the impoverished, nor the imprisoned. For years, the diagrams of his nerves branch in confinement, and yet he has began a new life, one of labor, of wife and child, his house asleep by the shore, a few cattle battering the fattening ground. But something has begun to crack, that dizzy spell of mist, that death sweeping over him, blaring in the dark, that thick rust sigh of the sea. This time he set up his gear because he had to, with no choice but to curse the coming waters. This time he swooped so low he could finger the waves, dropped so low the foam soaked his hull of feathers. It's just as well. He banished it all to the barn. The plowing goes on. But today in Central America, it does matter. Another boy fell from the sky, chicken fluff and all. Body tangled, indeed, body tangled. And there was no one around.
That's so powerful. And I think, going back to something we were touching base on earlier is that, at this point in history, where we're at right now, I think globally, um, it makes sense that we return to the myths and the legends and to really rely on the power of metaphor to speak for us when we are experiencing these kind of strains to our freedom of expression and, directly endangering ourselves if we come out and say sometimes what we feel and think. Um, so I think that it's really interesting how you've used these classical pieces to address a situation that is just so live and painful and vivid right now.
Yeah, yeah. That this poem in particular rose out of the stories that my students were bringing into the classroom back in, I would say maybe between 2016 up to the pandemic, right? A lot of unaccompanied minors that were coming into the classroom, and you know, a lot of them were coming from violence, from poverty, lack of resources. Some of them had a few years of education, some no education whatsoever. The absence of a family structure was always there, always there. So a lot of them were fleeing a lot of this terrible stuff that was happening to them, and at the same time there seemed to be a what how we say an obvious decision uh, to to erase Central American children, in places like Guatemala or Honduras or El Salvador, and so that story, and the fact that I was looking a lot at ekphrastic poetry, at that time, which is the literal description of a work of art. Um, I was thinking about how to use the artwork as a way to tell their stories without having to talk about um, them directly, right? And I was trying to um, use the visual artwork to communicate an emotional response that you would not get from an academic response to a painting, let's say, for example. Um, so that's when I started thinking of this painting in particular, because of the indifference to the fall of Icarus, right? Everybody in that painting, it seems to just continue plowing. Everybody's continuing with their routine. No one's paying attention to the fact that the Icarus fell into the water. In fact, if you look at that painting, if you put it back on, you'll notice that you're like, it might take you a couple of minutes. Like, where is Icarus? So I don't see him. And right at the bottom on the right side, I think you can see those white pale legs sticking out. Right? Yeah, right there, exactly. And you can see the fisherman that back down there too, who just continues to fish and not even concerned, right? Or the men here plowing up front. So that indifference to the suffering, I thought, resonated a lot with what the story that the kids were bringing to the classroom. And so I immediately gravitated to this painting because I felt like that is something in terms of ekphrastic poetry, right? Because a lot of the uh, uh, um, problems that I was having with ekphrastic poetry is that it would end up being a description of the painting, right? And it can't all be description. You know, you have to provide something like an insight or a thought or some kind of mood not found in the painting, right? If you're just describing the painting, why read the poem? You might as well just look at the painting, right? So the poet must bring something of themselves to the painting. So I thought when I can bring that Central American story into the painting, and that was a way for me to complicate the conversation that I was hearing from William Carlos Williams or W.H. Auden, and that's where things clicked for me with this poem.
I think that's great. And I think that right there, you've given us a mini class on how to write ekphrastic poetry and have an assignment there already. If anybody wants to pick up that
That's my
exercise.
next workshop. That's my next workshop.
Ahí está. No, I'm very much drawn to that poem, and also that it's the lead, one of the leading poems, the second poem in your book. Because overall, I had this sense that the theme of the book was this very much this underlying kind of feeling of being invisible or unseen or disappeared. And when I look at the epigraphs too, right? Like de Roberto Armijo, la cabeza inventa un terruño que solo yo conozco. And then another one you quote, Roque, país mío que no existe. Um, and there's this very much idea of this space and these people, either wanting to reclaim a place that's only exists in their memory, or the actual act of being physically forgotten or disappeared, through violence, or through a change of a narrative, purposeful, a purposeful change of narrative, um, is what we're experiencing right now as Central Americans. And so I think also, when I think about the way that you've taken kind of like these classical figures, the winged man on the cover, which is Goya, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I wondered, did you come up with that for the cover? Because for me, I think, this image is very much like a thing of imagination and fantasy, but it's also in a way kind of like very Salvadoran in the way that it's like only
Hazlo todo.
through intense physical effort can we actually, take flight, ¿verdad?
Yeah.
Um, through wings that we ourselves have made, ¿verdad?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I have a kind of an anecdote about that, kind of lengthy. So if I go on too long, let me know.
mhm,
Um, but so we were working on the cover, and I knew that I wanted something with typography because of SS4, right? So
mhm,
yes. So I know, and I always loved the jazz covers from the 1950s and 60s, especially the Blue Note covers, and they use a lot of typography in those jazz covers. So I always loved that, and I'm like, I always wanted to recreate that in my book covers. And so since we were calling the book SS4, I'm like, yeah, we gotta do something with the S. So
mhm,
we gotta look at typography. So I was thinking along those ways, and so um, uh, Diane from Black Lawrence, the publisher, said, "Well, you need an image or something, or you need something more than that." So I was like, okay. So I was thinking about that, and then I think my wife had to do a workshop Saturday or Sunday morning, and then so I was home with the boys, and we were gonna have breakfast. So I pulled out all the cereal boxes, put them on the table, the milk and the bowls and spoons, and so okay, so what are you gonna have? And so we're looking at the cereals, and I pulled these boxes from it's like some kind of chocolate peanut butter puffs or something like that from Trader Joe's, and it had all these colors that were very 70s like to me, like this cream, yellow, orange, black, tan, kind of maroon, red. And I love the color. So I took the picture, so I sent it to her. And I said, can we put this colors in it? And she goes, okay, yeah, but you still need an image. And then so
So
I go
you're
back.
totally thinking like an artist here, even in the cover of your book and how
Yeah,
you got inspired by the colors.
exactly. Normally I would never do that.
Mhm.
I would like be so afraid to even say or think in that manner. I would let somebody else lead me, to decide what should we include for a cover.
Uh-huh.
So go back to the boys. I'm picking them up. Well, we're picking them up from swimming class, and we're gonna get something to eat. So we're driving to Pasadena. We're driving around the Norton Simon Museum, and they have an exhibition on Goya. And outside the museum, there is a banner, huge banner, and the flying man that you speak of was there. And I saw it, and I was reminded of that etching. I'm like, because I thought of Icarus falling, and I thought this is a nice counter response to think of Icarus rising, right? So I thought, oh, that's perfect. So I send them, the etching, and we they
Beautiful. I
send me
love it.
they
Yeah.
send me these four images,
Uh-huh.
and they said, which one do you like? And I said, I like all four of them. I never would do that in the pet. I mean, with Art of Exile, I would never imagine saying like, okay, can we do all four of them? I would think we have to do one of them. So I said
Mm.
put all four of there on the cover, and that's how that came about. And so I thought, yeah, the flying man, it's a nice counter argument, to the fall of Icarus. You know, where we have the ascent and the descent, or the rise and fall. And it just reminds me of like how, like you were saying, Salvadorans will find a way to survive.
Mhm.
They'll invent something. They'll Mickey Mouse it. They'll come up with a Mickey Mouse version of it so that we can continue. You know.
Uh-huh. Well, no, let's hear one more poem because I think we can converse all night, but we need to highlight your poetry as well, and
That's
then
true.
yeah, pick another one, and then we'll keep talking.
This is um titled El Mozote.
Mm.
And it's inspired by the memorial for the massacre at El Mozote. I think in 1981, December, about 1,000 civilians were murdered. And the names that you're going to hear were taken at random from the list of the dead from a book by, I have it right here, Mark Danner. He has a list of the dead at the back of this book, which that fascinated me when I first got that book back in the 90s. So I always knew I wanted to do something with the names. El Mozote. The only movement is the movement of the monument. The contour, the black metal, you turn the page, and the family rises. No arch, no tinsel, the town remains denuded of its residents. Many years, the very picture lost in the hills. Stunning, the number of shoes, tricycles mangled, the absence of physical grace, the cadence of a well-tuned body. The photograph leads you to coarse lines crooked along weathered grains of a wooden tablet. Probably painted by a carpenter or woodcutter, loops around the bold whitewash, the color of clarity. Anacleta, Amilcar, Macario, names branded for a testament of wood and rock. The morning the deer roam the thick of the woods, panels of the sky capsize. The stare innocent, the cut unclean, the bar, the stem, the height. Cayetano, Candelaria, Concepcion built like a house. The sacristy burned the way wood transformed to fire, out of rubble, fire, femurs of fire. Like Milton's late massacre, they're outdated to the jury, rub of their own eyes, yet everything is archived in the clouds. Doroteo, Filomena, Facundo. Each name a chamber, a chapel, fragment of a line, like an off rhyme or a shotgun blast. The bending and brushing, insects, vessel-like roots reaching for foliage. Soila, Cliserio, Olayo, lines of a child, a minefield.
Yeah, and I hadn't thought about this until right now, but this makes me think of Yusuf Komunyaka's Facing It poem, which is also about the veterans monument and he himself being a veteran. And I think it's very curious that that we're talking about this idea of being seen or unseen and invisible, and bodies being disappeared or forgotten. But I think that maybe because of the images of Goya and the kind of world that you're creating within this book, I also felt like there was a kind of a search for, or a kind of awareness of a dark presence, really, of like I don't know, if we're talking about myth and kind of like going back to the clash of good and evil and all of that stuff, I felt very much like this kind of awareness of things in that dark. Can you tell me a little bit about what your process of writing this poem was? Because obviously, as you're saying, you read it out loud, you start hearing a repetition of sounds, um, and then the names are told also in somewhat alphabetical order, but loosely, no?
Yeah, so um yeah, the I was thinking I was thinking like along the same lines that I was looking at the Motherwell painting, uh, the elegies to the Spanish Republic. Um, I was
I'll
thinking of,
I'll project that image, and you can talk a little bit about the two poems, even though we're not going to hear Motherwell's because it's a little long.
right,
But I
right,
think
right.
that these two poems speak to each other, and so maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the making of these two poems.
Yeah, so I was looking at a lot of like monuments that had that elegiac, right, inclination, if I can say, and to write about them so that I can get to the story I want to talk about without being so direct. And so uh, looking at the monument, sorry, the memorial for the people of El Mozote, that's where this poem began. Because when I looked at that metal figure of the family, and then I think there was also a wall, a brick wall, with a tiny roof, and the names of the victims were in wooden tablets, right? And so I started like again like an ekphrastic approach, started describing the family contour, started describing the wooden tablets, and they were just fragment pieces that I had around that I thought, okay, how am I going to put this together? And then when I realized, um, when I thought of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial and the names, I thought, oh, okay, so let's go back to the names listed in the back of the massacre at El Mozote by Mark Daner. And so that's where I thought, okay, so the names are going to give me that organization. And so it was just a matter of like, okay, so just start playing with language, just start moving things around, because I think at one point the poem started with the photograph leads you to coarse lines crooked along weather grains, and I realized that that's not moving the poem. That's not working. But when I got to the line, the only movement is the movement of the monument. The tone of that line, I was like, that's it. That's where I got to start. And after I did that, it just exactly that's exactly what I was looking at. So this, right, in connection to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, in connection to the Motherwell painting that you were showing earlier, we're all connected because in the Motherwell poem, it's like me going through a gallery and looking at all these different versions of that painting that you had up, right? Because it's a series of paintings, right? They're all black and white. And so I imagine myself like going to the gallery and looking at them, kind of like going to the cross stations type of thing in a church, and describing each one, right? Describing each one. And every time I would describe it, I would think, okay, that's that one. And then I will move on to another one. And if I got inspired, then I will start writing about that one. And then I did not know how to end the poem until I thought of El Mozote, and I thought of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and I thought of the Wall of Names. So I thought, okay, for the Motherwell, I'm going to make my own Wall of Names, and that poem ends with the Wall of Names at the end that were taken from the. I don't know if you have a picture of that memorial, the one in San Salvador, which is, I think it's very similar to the Vietnam Veterans Memorial. La memoria, something, monument a la memoria y a la verdad. So all those three, poems are speaking to each other in terms of being ekphrastic poems, the names, the elegiac ambition in them, the monuments, all those different elements are there.
Yeah, I was trying to see if I could pull it up.
Yeah.
But I think that it's really interesting because I feel like, based on the conversation we're having, it's really it's been a really good hands-on approach of how to respond to art, but also how to respond to historic events, contemporary events, in a way that the central focus is the creation of art, no? Which is bringing our own experience, our own feelings, our own sensations to that piece, and whatever it is it spurs in us as we walk away, like what we're left with. And I think that the other thing that has me thinking a lot also, William, is that when I think about your body of work, just overarching, I think a lot about the way that you mention the earth, like dirt and bones. That's kind of like a recurring image that you constantly are like obsessed with, no? And I think about like artists like Dali, right? And the way that he used certain symbols like the ants, that was based on a memory that he had of a small child when he saw some dead animal being eaten alive or eaten, by ants. And for him, the ants just became the symbol of decay and destruction. And so I find it very curious that this book, which begins with kind of like an image of flight and taking to the air, but still very much the poems are rooted in this earth, in the ground, and the things that are hidden in the or that grow in the ground, you know. So how does something become a symbol for you? Like, do you have I don't know, like recurring nightmares or dreams or something like that, like that becomes something that you want to get to like the bottom of?
Yeah, no, I think it has a lot to do with my experience in El Salvador when I was a child. I think that's where things were vivid, right? As a child, you live things in a more colorful, dramatic way, I think, and they things leave a big impression in you. And I think when I was a kid in El Salvador, that was when I was exposed to those elements, the dirt and the bones. I can't think of a moment where I did not play in the dirt. That was so essential to be out there playing chibolas con el trompo, right? Um, Being barefoot on the dirt, the hot ground. Um, so that is something that has remained with me, and of course, there was something about living El Salvador and trying to in a metaphorical way bring that soil with me in my pockets, right? So that soil, that dirt has always been something that became a symbol for me that represented that version of El Salvador that I knew. And the bones, I think, is the same situation where in times of war, when you dig, what do you find? You find bones. Um, in the Gravedigger's archaeology, I was taking an archaeological um, perspective, that in terms of like, well, we're gonna dig to find these pre-Columbian figures, but what are we finding? We're finding, the remains of a man that was killed about, I don't know, 5 years ago, right? So that sort of thing. So bones became something that you might call now as some sort of symbol for me, but they all come from that moment when I was a kid, I think, and they have remained with me. And they yeah, in a nightmarish way, I think you can say they haunt me, because they always are coming up, and they're part of my war stock. They're always there for my decision to use them in my work. So it goes back to the time when I was a young boy, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea. And you have a poem in this book called Spanish Lesson with a Handful of Dirt.
Yeah.
And that one goes back to kind of like an analysis of music. Um, but I think it's really interesting because how you're saying this, like that, the dirt or the bones, become this way of like constantly turning over this image or this symbol in your hands or in your mind, and it becomes kind of like a song, right? Like in that you're like riffing on it, and that it plays out in all possible directions. And I love that because I think that also very much underlines what you've been trying to do in this collection with this kind of need to experiment. And I think I want to ask you to read one of the poems that I feel is like super interesting because it's like free association of colors. This field of weeds and wildflowers.
Yeah. That poem, it's interesting because, yeah, like going back to the ekphrastic poems, right? The question was, okay, so if I were a painter, what would I how would I start? What color do I choose? And that's where that poem came from. I had no idea where it was going to lead me, right? um this field of weeds and wildflowers. If I were a painter, I start with blue, the color field, as in Sonny Rollins' Colossus. as in Rubén Darío's Azul. Shelbet. If this were a landscape, thick over thin, intended, or less ornate than a volcano, I say blue like the midday sky or the midday heart. All the birds in Central America, madcap. If I had a choice, this oil, this water, this lank tool I fool in my fingers, I say the theatrical blue flame in a gas stove, like the black and blue on my torso. The enormity of it, the batons and asphalt in blue uniforms. This big vapor rub jar clad on my grandmother's bedside. This asteroid snug fit in the graveside, darker than soot, darker than the coil look of feather things. Her morning walk, her morning song, down the hallway, the mud, the match, when she joined the landscape of birds, this field of weeds and wildflowers. Let me brush my hand over the canvas, like in a mirror, how faithful the camphor, her eucalyptus, her mint, I sniff and smear on my nostrils. All the blood tint, this cold blue pigment, all the ink, blue as a painter who wipes stained fingers on her apron. So I had no idea that this poem was going to turn out to be about my grandmother. You know, but when I got to the big vapor rub jar, I knew this is about my grandmother. You know, you know, I mean, grandmas, right? Like you're sick, big vapor rub, get it out on the forehead. You have a stomach ache, rub it on the belly, right? All sorts of different what do you call it? Remedies with big vapor.
It's so fascinating. And Efra wants to ask a question, and I just want to comment something, because before you said the grandmother, I mean, I went straight to blue, the color of our flag, the color of other very relevant things in our contemporary politics. And the grandmother also as being this, you know, wise healer. So it's very interesting how if you take a really deep read into it, you can apply it to many different, as a symbol of many different things. Así que vamos a pasarle la palabra a Efra para que te haga la pregunta. No sé if you, unless you want to respond real quick to what I said.
Well, let Ephraim go one at a time, I think.
William, estaba, bueno, escuchando toda la conversación desde el inicio y bueno, luego también de este poema que decías en el que no sabías inicialmente hacia dónde te iba a llevar. Y pensando también que los artistas visuales siento que tienen como una relación más cercana con el error y con las cosas que no son tan conscientes. ¿Sientes que has tenido alguna diferencia de relación con los errores en cuanto a tu escritura? Es decir, desde antes, de cómo escribías antes a cómo ha sucedido este nuevo libro.
Me encanta esa pregunta. Sí, yo creo que sí. Yo creo que es cierto eso de que pintores, hasta músicos, se dan esa libertad de hacer errores y no, ¿cómo se dice? Castigarse, ¿no? Por haber hecho ese error. Y cierta cosa que como escritor, especialmente yo, a mí personalmente, no me daba esa libertad. Y ahora que he estado viendo estas pinturas, sí tienes razón, me ha dado esa libertad de hacer errores, y saber de que cuando hago un error, es un error hermoso, ¿no? Que es un error de que, wow, nunca me hubiera imaginado que hubiera llegado a ese error si no me hubiera dado la libertad. Y esa sensación de que no hay nada malo en lo que acabo de hacer, de que no hay nada um, erróneo de lo que he hecho, pero que en vez, es como darle la vuelta a la moneda, ¿no? De que al otro lado hay una respuesta, porque todo tiene su contrario, ¿no? Blanco, negro, arriba, abajo, amor, muerte, vida, muerte, lo que sea. Um, pero sí, sí, eso sí es definitivamente algo de que a través de estas pinturas, estar viendo estas pinturas todo el tiempo y pensando, ¿qué haría yo si fuera un pintor? ¿No? Como Jackson Pollock, ¿no? Este, no consideraba esas manchas que hacía con las brochas de dejar caer la pintura así en el canvas sin pensar de que ese es un error. Hasta, tiene que tomar ese paso adelante um, y tiene que ser un paso valiente, creo yo, porque muchos de nosotros nos da miedo tomar ese paso, qué va a pensar la gente, sus compañeros, escritores, de cuando uno toma ese paso. Y sí, yo creo que es cierto eso de estar pensando como un pintor me ayudó a tomar esas decisiones y a tener sentir una libertad más grande cuando escribo y tener ¿cómo se dice? Más confianza en lo que siento. Y no pensar mucho, pero sentirlo más, ¿no? Ya pues después puedes pensarlo, ¿no? A ver si hace sentido o no hace sentido. Y si no hace sentido, pero se siente bien, pues ahí se va a ir, ¿no? Y yo creo que de que eso fue una de las cosas de que yo creo que Alexandra estaba diciendo al principio, de que notó esa diferencia en este libro comparado a los últimos dos, ¿no? Sí, definitivamente. Gracias por esa pregunta.
Ya, gracias a ti.
Yo creo que nos vamos a pasar un poco de tiempo, pero no importa, porque me gustaría escuchar un poema en español de William y también quizás un poema más de este libro como para cerrar. Y solo como respuesta a lo que están hablando ustedes, yo también noté en este libro que hay varias preguntas y parte del cambio que vi que en la obra de William, él siempre tiene como una gran confianza en su voz, ¿verdad? O sea, son como unas frases declarativas, o sea, sin ninguna duda. Pero yo creo que en este libro también hay como bastante espacio para lo que no se dice o lo que no tiene una respuesta clara. Entonces, eso también me ha parecido muy, muy interesante en este libro. Así es que te dejo escoger dos poemas, uno en español y uno en inglés, y luego podemos ver si hay alguna pregunta de parte de alguien, am, y si no, pues ahí cerramos con tus poemas.
Para continuar, what you just said,
Ujú.
to continue with the idea, I'm going to read the opening poem then. It's a short one, so it'll give us time. It's a semi-sonnet, a disheveled sonnet, right? It's not a perfect sonnet. It's not a pure sonnet. It's the ghost of a sonnet, if you will, right? It's untitled, and it's loose in its musicality, but also I think inventive in my attempt to break out of the tradition. It's untitled too. Posting, boasting, 80 rounds from an officer, burning, looting. The life of a miner always leads to a line of corpses. Segregated schools, segregated hoods, not enough money in the bank for representation, for a voice, for a commercial. Be mindful of Minutemen, pilgrims, unidentified men, unhinged, who donate money to all white men in suits executing laws. Take note of drug trafficking with the pistol of a teenage assassin. Pay attention to his invisible hoodie stitched to his head. Try to count backwards. Try day swelling and crack backwards. Try School of the Americas in Georgia. Try Atlacatel Battalion. Try City Hall. Try the coroner's log. Be vigilant of the government as the ghost of God, including Michelangelo and his cadavers. Also taking care of other people's babies, crybabies, and shit loaders. Wiping, mopping. What else? What else makes you disappear? So I think that one speaks to what you were saying with the declarative sentence, and which is, yeah, it's something that I found very hard to do in the first two books. I would always hide behind the images, you know. I was too afraid to speak up and, you know, speak my mind, but I was trying to find a way around saying things that now I think maybe, you know, because I'm older now, and I have kids, and so I feel like I have reached that age where the elders in my family are passing away, and the young people in my family are looking at me as the elder, and that's a scary feeling, right? Because they're like, oh, wait a minute. I don't know if I'm ready for this, and so you begin to realize that there are certain decisions that you have to make, and I think that plays an element in these kinds of poems that you speak of.
Yeah, that's great. It feels like that. And this poem, I don't know if it's just me, but I also felt kind of like riffs off of El Poema de Amor de Roque, you know, kind of like all of these different places where we're found and lost.
Yeah, that's interesting. You mentioned that. Yeah, you know that it was this actually sonnet that was not meant to be for SS4. This sonnet was meant to be for my new manuscript, but I didn't feel like I had a very strong poem to open SS4, and this boasting sonnet introduced a lot of the major themes that I cover in SS4. So I thought it was more appropriate to include it in SS4, and I thought it was a stronger poem to open up with. And so that's why it's included here. And I'm playing lately. I've been playing a lot with sonnets. You know, like disheveled sonnets that I was speaking of earlier, and this was one of those where there's the echo of the tradition. I always had a problem with the sonnet because it was too sing-songy for me. Every time I tried it and tried to follow the iambic pentameter and try to follow the rhyme scheme, it was just too unnatural to my voice. And so it wasn't until I think Edward Hirsch put out a book called Lay Back the Darkness. In the back of that book, there is a collection of contemporary sonnets where he has, the metrics are very loose. The rhyme scheme is like is off rhymes or slanted rhymes, or sometimes there is no rhyme scheme, or sometimes he starts with the rhyme scheme, then he drops it off, and then he comes back to it. So it's like an echo of the tradition and with the contemporary voice, and I like that. And once I saw that, I'm like, oh, okay. So I gravitated towards that, and that gave me the courage to try working on these sonnets, and this is one of those first ones.
Yeah, I saw that you have maybe, I think, one or two in here, and you also have a sestina. So I was also very pleased to see all of the different kind of experimentation and form, and the way that you reinterpret it is as well.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, once the sonnet gets under your skin, it's like you can't let it go. It's like everything you see is a sonnet.
Yeah.
Everything you write is a sonnet. It's like, oh my God, another one? This is enough. So
Yeah.
my next book is a book of sonnets.
Ooh, really? Nice.
Yeah. Yeah. So should we
Well,
read the Spanish one, I guess?
yeah. Would love to hear you read a Spanish poem. It's not from this book, it's from the collection that's gonna come out next year.
Yeah, it's from the book Canicula that Mario Cetino translated. And this is the title of the book. Es el título del libro que va a salir, una antología poética de mis primeros dos libros, Canícula, para Lori. A los 40 vivimos en un bungalow de 2 cuartos, sin aire acondicionado. Mi esposa y yo dormimos con un ventilador zumbando toda la noche y una botella de spray al lado de la cama. Tengo un sueño recurrente, un gato durmiendo la siesta en una casa estilo Tudor. Sé que esa tiene 4 cuartos, con un sistema de ventilación de línea completa, mientras su dueño trabaja en la oficina. Siempre me despierto aturdido, de mal humor, para trabajar en un edificio de ladrillos rojizos, enseñando gramática a niños, con las ventanas abiertas de par en par y la ola de calor golpeándonos la cara. Apagamos las luces y nos quedamos sentados en la penumbra, a pesar de lo que dice el director. Recorremos las páginas del norte, Jack London, en las cumbres nevadas, y seguimos bebiendo el agua tibia en nuestras botellas plásticas. En el salón de profesores, los adultos toman grandes tragos café helado. El día es largo y húmedo. Cada pensamiento, una gota de sudor. Cuando llego a casa, mi esposa y yo nos damos un beso. Hace demasiado calor para abrazar. Puedo oler las horas frustrantes de andar buscando trabajo en su pelo negro y largo. Nos duchamos. Leemos Una habitación con vistas para recordar nuestros días de cortejo en invierno. El ventilador tira aire caliente. A ratos veo un brillo en su mejilla y quisiera atraparlo como una luciérnaga en un frasco. Cuando se lo digo a ella, la tapa es la noche y la luciérnaga, su vuelo torpe, nosotros perdidos en un campo de cebada. Cuando abro el frasco, la tapa se mueve como la bisagra de la puerta a nuestra casa Tudor. Estamos en un jardín inglés, con libros abiertos en el regazo, y ya va a llover.
Wow. Solo una pregunta, porque creo que hay un par de preguntas del público, pero ¿cómo te sentís brevemente escuchando tus poemas en español? Porque para mí el traducir mis poemas es como una herramienta de edición. Yo ya no puedo, o sea, el momento que termino un poema lo tengo que traducir inmediatamente al español porque para mí no puedes esconder las cosas en una traducción. Ya cuando se pasa de un idioma a la otra, algunas cosas te salen que no, como que estás leyendo el poema de otra persona. ¿Cómo te has sentido tú en este proceso, William?
Sí, sí es cierto. Cuando Mario me mandaba las versiones de estos poemas y las leía, a veces miraba a los poemas con una diferente cara, porque yo conozco mis poemas en inglés. Entonces los poemas tienen cierto tono, ciertas sensaciones, ciertas memorias, pero cuando me lo mandó en español, ciertos poemas, especialmente este Canícula, ah, había momentos en el poema de que yo no estaba, yo creo que no estaba en control de ello o no estaba enterado de lo que estaba sucediendo, pero al oírlo en español oía ciertas cosas que, que en inglés no las oigo. Um, y diferentes frases, ¿no? También como ya va a llover, algo tan salvadoreño que nunca imaginaría yo decirlo así o pensar eso cuando escribí el poema y cuando lo estoy leyendo en inglés. No, esa frase nunca se me vino a la mente porque yo solo sueño en español, creo yo, pero escribo en inglés, ¿no? Entonces, no, cuando estoy escribiendo no estoy pensando en español. Eso fue algo muy interesante porque es como, no era solo como ver un amigo viejo y lejano, pero también un amigo viejo y lejano que me viene y me dice, ¿sabes qué? Tengo algo que no te he contado cuando tenías 5 años, déjame decirte ahora. And it's like, wow.
Wow,
Right? So it's that kind of thing.
that's
Because a lot of
transformative.
yeah, because a lot of the poems, a lot of the translations that Mario did taught me so much about myself that I was like, oh wow, I completely forgot, or I wasn't aware, I did not know, right? Or it slipped my mind, whatever. But there it is. So it's nice to see those new moments.
That's
You
great.
know?
Bueno, I think we need to start saying goodbye. Efra, I don't know if maybe there's a question or two from any of the viewers, or we can maybe return to it and answer it
Sí,
later.
de hecho hay alguien que hizo una pregunta por mensaje directo y dice, ¿cuáles crees que son tus influencias más duraderas? ¿Cuáles son tus influencias más recientes también?
Oh, esa pregunta es muy difícil porque no tenemos suficiente tiempo. Am, yo creo que siempre que escribo estoy pensando en claridad, alegría, estoy pensando en Roque Dalton, estoy pensando en Alfonso Quijada Urías, estoy pensando en Roberto Armijo, am, siempre Neruda, Lorca, Vallejo. Esos escritores siempre están conmigo cuando escribo. Yo creo que últimamente, por el acceso que tenemos al Internet, tengo el placer de leer tantas diferentes voces de que usualmente no, no las leería porque yo no soy la clase de escritor de que puede decir mañana voy a ir a Nueva York porque tal persona va a leer, ¿no? Tengo que esperar que esa persona venga aquí a Los Ángeles para que yo las pueda escuchar en su presentación. Entonces, con el internet, o así como en este Zoom video que estamos haciendo ahorita o de Facebook, ah, muchas personas pueden oír mi trabajo, ¿no? Entonces, en el mismo modo, yo he tenido la oportunidad de escuchar diferentes voces contemporáneas que normalmente yo no escuchaba antes, que yo no tenía acceso a esas voces. Y últimamente, especialmente con este libro, yo creo que esa fue una diferencia, de a pesar de esos poetas que mencioné anteriormente, um, este, tenía acceso a muchos escritores de aquí de Estados Unidos, de Centroamérica, escritores de que normalmente el único modo que yo los podía leer a ellos es si yo tuviera el libro. Pero ahora ya no tengo que tener el libro, yo eso meto al internet y bueno, puedo escuchar o leer el poema de alguien que normalmente no tuviera acceso al trabajo de ellos. Las influencias contemporáneas de hoy, creo yo, son muchas, pero ese, ah, esa multitud de voces, creo yo, abre muchos canales en mi imaginación y me da la oportunidad de pensar diferentes modos, ver diferentes modos, sentir diferentes cosas que normalmente no las tuviera si no tuviera acceso a esos poemas.
Y a mí se me ocurre solo una última cosa. Siendo poeta, ¿tú sientes que es la poesía lo que más lees o hay otros géneros que de igual manera te llaman mucho la atención o tienes algún tipo de literatura que sea como fuera del camino que a ti te interese y que te guste mucho consumir?
Sí, desde que empecé a escribir, yo siempre decía, no, yo soy poeta, punto. No hay nada más, solo libros de poesía, ¿no? Y pues después me di cuenta, bueno, tengo que saber de historia y mitología y filosofía y empecé a leer esos libros, ¿no? Pero cuando yo escribo, um, además de poesía, me gusta bastante escribir non-fiction. Um, Estoy tratando, la prosa, ¿no? Estoy tratando de escribir uh, mis memorias de mi tiempo en El Salvador. Y por que he tomado mucho tiempo haciendo eso porque me costaba bastante, ¿no? Porque tenía que aprender un nuevo modo de expresarme. En un poema, tú quieres todo el tiempo que todo esté pegando lo más alto emocionalmente, ¿no? En la poesía, todo el tiempo querés ese momento emocional, como el clímax, momento climático, pero en ficción o prosa, no todo el tiempo puede ser así. Hay muchos momentos de descripción, de que nada pasa. ¿Verdad? Yo me acuerdo que iba a presentaciones de escritores de novela y me sentaba escucharlos y hablaban de una pareja de que están cenando y llegan a casa y estamos pensando, oh, va a pasar algo entre estas dos personas y se levanta uno, va al baño, regresa y todavía están en el cuarto ahí tomando su café, no nada ha pasado. Y eso no es lo que en la poesía no es así, ¿no? En la poesía todo tiene que ser um, muy emocional y entonces porque he estado escribiendo bastante, he estado aprendiendo ese modo de escribir en prosa y tratando de escribir mis memorias, y aprender a cómo a escribir una oración uh, sin ritmo, bueno, siempre tiene ritmo, pero pensar el enfoque es la oración, ¿no? En la prosa, es lo que quiero decir. Que no es la línea, ya no que la oración es mi enfoque. Y eso me ha llevado bastante también a empezar a escribir poemas en prosa. Es lo que ahorita me está fascinando bastante escribir. Pero es porque yo creo que no hubiera llegado a eso si no hubiera empezado a escribir mis memorias de cuando estaba pequeño en El Salvador.
Mm.
So exciting, William, all these different projects that you have coming up, lots of things to look forward to, and
Yeah.
all these new areas that you're exploring. So we're just so happy that you took time out of your very busy schedule. I know that it's the end of the semester. You have two kids, and your beautiful and talented poet wife also. Send her my regards to Lori. And thank you again for being here. We look forward to hearing more of your work. And I think that's it's been a real pleasure speaking with you and listening to your poetry. Thank you so much, William.
Thank you, Alexander, and thank you, Efraín. Bye.
Gracias.
Gracias.
Buenas noches a todos.
Adiós.
Adiós.